Good morning. We can see a number of people are now joining the webinar, so thank you for taking the time to join us and listen to today's talks live. We're just going to take a moment to allow people to join and then we will start the presentation. Thank you. Hi everyone. I would like to open by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the lands and waters across Australia when Marsden Jacob conducts its business. We also pay respects to elders and ancestors past and present and recognise there are leaders emerging. I live and work in Boorloo, or Perth, which is on Whadjuk Noongar Boodja, the country of the Whadjuk Noongar people. Now, the Talks Live series is an opportunity for us to bring people together, to learn, to share knowledge, and to give you some insights into some of the work that we do here at Marsden Jacob, and also to maybe take some thoughts away that you can apply to your own work. So my name is Dr Kate Riddell. I am a principal with Marsden Jacobs. I've been with Marsden Jacob now for 18 months and have had previous lives working in state government, in research at university and at research institutions as well. And I'm joined by my very esteemed colleague, Dr Joel Byrnes, who's an associate director with a background in economics. So in terms of, I'll just start by giving a bit of a scope of what today's presentation is, because social impact evaluation is quite a broad term and used in a range of settings, sectors and contexts. So the focus today is on social impact evaluation or assessment with specific reference to how it's used in business case development. So a little bit about me. I've been playing in the social impact space for at least 20 years, if not more, with a focus in research, policy and strategy development that has a focus on delivering better and more equitable outcomes for marginalised people within the community. And it is this knowledge, this lens and the frameworks that I've picked up over those 20 years that I bring to the impact assessments that I do. And those are some of the things that I'd like to share with you today, some of those insights. It's a multidisciplinary kind of piece of work that we do, and we can always learn from each other. We might all have tips and tricks to make our life that make what we do better. Joel has extensive business case experience drawing on his economics background. And Joel and I have been working on a project, a business case where social impact was required. And I had done the part that I needed to do. And Joel's words were something along the lines of, that's a bit different to what I'm used to seeing, and I think it has value. So he's going to provide some insights throughout the presentation on what he sees as being the point of difference from someone who develops business cases but doesn't do social impact, and the value of this approach. Joel, is there anything you wanted to say at this stage?
Yes, hello everyone. My perspective on social impact is from a user of social impact assessments. Through preparing business cases, I have social impact assessments and evaluations delivered to me, typically as a deliverable, and they can be fairly turgid affairs, but they don't have to be. And hopefully what you'll get from today is from the seat I sit in as the author of the whole business case, what makes a social impact assessment really resonate with decision makers, as opposed to just being part of the technical advisor mix.
Thanks, Joel. Okay, so what are we going to discuss now? The why now, and I'll get to that in a little bit. So it's about demonstrating your alignment and the contribution of your project to a bigger picture that can give you the edge. And in terms of doing this presentation, I've taken my cue from the International Association for Impact Assessment, and they talk about the effectiveness of an SIA in achieving better outcomes is maximised by being relevant to the proponents. In Joel's parlance, the decision makers. So it's how do you connect that to what they are doing? I'm going to talk about the fundamentals of social impact, as for me, they're the foundation of doing a social impact assessment, and how you can take your social impact evaluations and assessment beyond more than the bare minimum of focusing on recognizing and managing impacts, to how you can really enhance and maximize the benefits that your project can take. So there will be a lot more emphasis on benefits and enhancements. I'm going to use a hypothetical case study to walk you through what I do to approach the scoping phase and how I start piecing that together. I'll bring to you some tips and tools for how you go about trying to maximize that relevance by identifying where your enhancement opportunities are and connecting them so that they align with and support the stakeholder priorities or decision maker priorities. I'll just give you a little word of warning first up, or just a bit of another sort of set of boundaries. I'm not walking you through an entire SIE, SIA process. I think that probably is a term-long course that you would have to do. And I'm not even going to walk you through the entire phase of the process. There will be a focus on steps that happen within the scoping phase, but they're equally important because these are the places where you start documenting who's going to be impacted, what the impacts are likely to be, and where you can start looking at who your stakeholders are, what are the potential enhancements you can make, and how you can document them in a very systematic way. So, next slide, please. So why this topic and why now? Well, big picture thinking, large-scale projects happen in multi-governance settings. They're often whole of government, and they cut across all tiers of government as well. And the focus of this project is going to be more about decision makers as opposed to community. It's a different sort of set of stakeholders. Now, they are your apex stakeholders because in a regulatory and funding sense, they are holding the purse strings and they are making the decisions on when your project goes ahead. But why we're talking about this and why now is a lot of those stakeholders are starting to build agendas around ESG, the environmental and social governance. They're looking to enhance their social license with the electorate, and there's a shift towards commissioning for outcomes. So particularly if you are requiring funding for your project, it's demonstrating what the outcomes of the project are and where they connect to broader outcomes that feed into this argument for commissioning and purchasing your project or funding your project. So there's value and benefit in looking beyond the immediate social locality of where the project will take place, as well as the project parameters. So you're doing more than just building a piece of infrastructure, or you might be doing more than just developing a program to deliver on the ground. What is the broader context in which that is operating? There's a couple of key questions that you can ask yourself in doing this. So who are the decision makers, your apex stakeholders? What are their priorities? How can you enhance your project and the project benefits in line with those priorities? And the reason being is you could act alone and have small scale impact, or you could act within a framework and within a larger agenda of benefits to have a bigger and wider impact as well. So I like to think of it as a jigsaw, hence the infographic that we have here. There's a lot of separate pieces and different pieces, but they all fit together to bring together a nice, neat picture and a whole. So this presentation is partly about finding the pieces, fitting them together, and putting your project at the center of that picture to maximize its relevance. Can I have the next slide, please? So what is social impact? And I like to take this back to basics. It's the fundamentals that underlie what you're doing and what you need to do through your business case and through your project. And this draws on the IAIA's principles and values for SIA. For me, they're fundamentally about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And it's how you enhance your benefits to ensure that they are distributed evenly across communities and across groups, or that the impacts aren't felt more detrimentally by one group over another. In terms of equity, equity is about treating different people differently in order to treat them equally, sometimes referred to as substantive equality. And you'll notice from the infographic there, equality is everybody gets a box that's the same size. Equity is giving people the different size boxes they need to stand up and enjoy the same view. I like to think of it as something like the stall gift or any handicap in horse racing. It's another good analogy. It's about evening the playing field to make sure everyone has an equal chance and can enjoy the same benefits. So when we talk about marginalised groups in Australia, we generally focus on First Nations people, people from culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds, younger people and older people, people from LGBTIQA plus backgrounds, people living with disability, and women. And these people are considered, these groups and individuals are considered marginalised because they're more likely to or at greater risk of experiencing poorer outcomes and less of the benefits than other members of the community. I like to use the word marginalised. You might see vulnerable used elsewhere, but for me, marginalised recognises that there are outside influences over which people have no control that are a factor in why they don't receive an equitable share or they don't receive equitable benefits. So in putting together your social impact assessment or evaluation, the key things are considering the differences, disparities, and inequities that these groups experience, and to inform, with this information, inform the design of deliberate actions that you can undertake and enhance through your project to address these inequities and disparities. Can I have the next slide, please? And I'm also starting with a bit of theory versus practice. And again, this goes back to the IAIA, and they have observed that there's often a disconnect between theory and practice. And this is partly because SIA arose within the environmental impact assessments and therefore adopted EIA frameworks and practices, which didn't necessarily have people at the centre or the sort of social justice aspect. And so what they've observed again is used, whether in business cases or in designing development projects, the focus remains on identifying and managing and mitigating risks and loses sight of benefits that can be delivered and the opportunities to enhance them. Now, this is not something that is alien to undertaking social impact assessment or social impact evaluations. This kind of approach is clearly embedded in the guidelines put out by the New South Wales government and the Queensland government. In fact, I'd recommend those because they're very nice, neat, easy ways of being able to understand how you build in the equity lens, the diversity lens, and how you build in the benefits and assessments. So if we could move to the next slide, please. So this is about going beyond the basics or going beyond the bare minimum. So as you see, there's that, again, I'll come back to that statement by the IAIA about maximising, delivering outcomes. You can be maximised by being relevant to the proponents who initiate and implement projects. So these are, as I said, your apex stakeholders. What are their goals and priorities? And by focusing in on them, you can make your project more relevant. Their goals and priorities often include delivering better outcomes, whether that be for a state as a whole, whether that be on, and they also have specific they have specific strategies that they will have to focus in on delivering better outcomes to marginalised groups. So by using this information and having this big picture lens, you can design your project to align with these as well as to support them. So you can put your project at the centre as well as contribute to a broader agenda which may deliver a broader and more sustained impact. So the slides that follow are on the tips on how to piece together that bigger picture. I'll just throw to Joel and ask if Joel has any comments or thoughts he'd like to add at this stage.
Yeah, just to reinforce what Kate's been saying there from my perspective, I was fortunate enough when I worked at one of the big four consultants, not PwC, and at AECOM, which is a large engineering consultancy, that I was led by two women who have a lot of reach and a lot of influence in political spheres. One of whom is a senator in the Commonwealth Government at the moment, and the other is Jennifer Westacott, who is stepping down soon or retiring from the BCA. And both of them finally got through to me that policy is all about people. And as an economist, you would be surprised how many times I completely forget that. Jennifer said it to me the best. She said, water is all about people. Just never forget it. You can do all the technical analysis you want. Water is just about people. So you've got to come at everything you do in a business case or an economic analysis from that perspective. Just think of the people and you'll be heading down the right track. And that's really what Kate does differently to others, is to think of how the stakeholders are thinking of it. And those stakeholders are invariably thinking about their people, the people that they represent, how they will be impacted negatively, yes, but also they do have a focus on the positives. So arming those decision makers and stakeholders with the positives and the negatives can be really powerful.
Thanks, Joel. And I think that also reinforces that point that not just with social impact, but particularly in a business case, it's a very multidisciplinary piece of work. And so we all come to it with different knowledges and different lenses. And it's by working together, we can start bringing those things in, because obviously I'm not an economist, so the economics sometimes is baffling to me, but the people is what I get and what I understand. So as we all work together as a team, we can really build something a bit more powerful. So could I have the next slide, please? So this is where I'm going to take you through maximising the relevance and giving you some tips and maybe some tools on how you can start aligning your benefit enhancement with stakeholder goals. So as you see there, these are standard steps that you would take in an SIA or SIE scoping phase, where you would be identifying and describing impacts, understanding the social context and documenting the social baseline, where you would be identifying stakeholders and documenting opportunities to enhance benefits. Now there I've got a couple of key questions that I keep in the back of my mind as I approach this, as well as some of the processes. So, and just to note, they're not necessarily a linear or sequential process. You might find yourself going backwards and forwards and doing them, but having a place to put your thoughts together in a nice, clear, concise way is good. So we're looking at what are the anticipated impacts, and in this case, I'm going to look at benefits. What does the social context look like? Who are your high influence apex stakeholders, your decision makers? What are their priorities? Then mapping the projects to their priorities and documenting the opportunities for enhancements that align with those stakeholders' priorities. So can I have the next slide, please? So step one, identifying anticipated impacts. Now this is a highly hypothetical, fictitious case study that I've come up with. It probably doesn't stack up to any engineering standards at all, because I'm not an engineer, but we're proposing to build a desalination plant for the ocean forest region, which is in the sunny state of Oswestia. Now, the driver for the project is that the region is experiencing rapid population growth, business and industry growth and diversification, at the same time experiencing decreasing rainfall. And those industries that are growing and diversifying are very water reliant. So the proposal is to construct a 200 gigalitre year capacity desalination plant. And the objective of doing that is to deliver a reliable and sustainable water source for to support this growth in population and the economy as well. And the outcome is water security for the region. And the reason I've highlighted water security is my way of thinking often is conceptual or thematic. And so with water security, this is where your ultimate outcomes are for people. If we take the UN's definition, it's about livelihoods, human well-being and socioeconomic development, protection against waterborne pollution, water-related disasters, and preserving ecosystems. So it's from there that the long-lasting sustained impacts long past when the piece of infrastructure has been built, they're the things that are going to continue to have that effect. So Again, high level, looking at what some of the anticipated impacts there, and you can see there are the negatives, the disturbances to the environment, the dust and noise, the physical obstructions and traffic increases, and potential impact on First Nations people's cultural spaces and places. And then the positives, employment and business opportunities, water security, clean green community spaces, climate change resilience, economic diversification. So there's some of the standard things that come up through SIA assessments generally. Can I have the next slide, please? So this is step 2. This is the social context of the location and the locality profile. So here is your baseline, and that's where you'll be able to measure some of the impacts that you've had, some of the changes you've affected over time. This is a cut down version of some very standard indicators that you would use, certainly not the full set. And in there, I've deliberately chosen to look at what would be some of the marginalised groups within the community so that we can talk to how we go about maximising benefits for them. So what we see from the region is that it is going to grow a lot by 2046. So you're going to have more people coming in, so there'll be a higher demand for water. It's growing much faster than the rest of the state. It is a much younger population than the rest of the state, so it will continue to grow. You'll have families moving in, so the demographics are going to keep shifting and they're going to keep growing. We have higher levels of diversity on most indicators compared to the rest of the state, so potentially more people who could be negatively impacted or more likely not to enjoy the benefits of the project compared with other people, unless there are some deliberate enhancements made to the project. The employing industries, as I say, they're very water dependent and they're very different to the rest of the state. The average weekly income is lower, but the cost of weekly rents is higher. So you've also got that socioeconomic differential. So these are all of the things that to consider about, one, what the impacts are, where the benefits enhancements can happen. So if we can go to the next slide, please. So this is about identifying stakeholders, and because we are talking specifically about the decision makers, the authorising environment is often one that is very useful in terms of a framework for identifying who are your key stakeholders in this process. They occur in multi-governance settings, operate in a broader strategic landscape, so you're looking at a range of different people, and you need the backing often from multiple stakeholders. And this is where the herding cats comes in, because they quite often have different priorities and want different things from that project. So it's about then what are the commonalities, where can we bring those people together and identify what opportunities all of them can agree on. So as I say, the authorising framework, as you can see there, we've got the acts and regulations that are very pertinent to this particular type of project. And we have 4 different ministers and 3 different departments. So you've already got a multitude of stakeholders. And so the next step is about how you map your project to those stakeholders' bigger picture and how you can start thinking about value adding to that to deliver a broader impact on the ground. Can I have the next slide, please? So it is a little bit of detective work. If you understand who your stakeholders are, you start doing a little bit of Google searches about where do I find out what their priorities are. And the good thing about most governments is they have a whole library of priorities out there that you can draw in on. Not all states are quite as good at this. Queensland and WA, I can say, are very good at documenting this. New South Wales and South Australia, quite good. If you're joining from Tasmania, and I appreciate it's a much smaller government with fewer departments, some of these documents are not quite as obvious or available. And I've put here, because you're looking at local, regional, state and Australian governments, they all have the same sorts of things. And these are also the other levels of stakeholders. So if you're building in a local area, you're going to need to get your local government on board. They have what's called a community strategic plan. Those are developed in consultation with the community, and it's about the aspirations and goals of the community. What are the things they're trying to achieve? So automatically you've got a little bit of a grounding about what is the feel in the community? What is it that they want? Where are the things that you could potentially value add in to help them realise their goals? It flows down into regional development commissions we have in WA, but there are also regional development groupings for different issues across Australia as well. There are water-specific ones. There are economic development ones. And again, they have plans. They're talking about what are the goals that are being achieved for that region. Where can you value in? And if you look at it from a regional perspective, you already see where you can start feeding into a broader picture. Again, we come down to the state level. I won't duplicate this with the Australian government because it's a similar sort of process, but I want to talk specifically here with WA, and Queensland has a similar setup. So in WA, the government has 4 high-level goals, and those are articulated in the WA budget papers. And again, it's about people. It's about how do we deliver economics that builds wealth, that builds jobs. So it's about people, it's about community safety, it's about delivering services. So those are a good guidance about what the agenda is. And for agencies, they have outcomes and services they're aligned to. So that is a good starting point to understand what are the things that we can contribute to, and then start drilling it down to your next level of stakeholders, your ministers and your agencies as well, and looking at their plans and doing the same sorts of things. So I think the next slide gives you an indication of how that looks. So could I have the next slide, please? So in this instance, it's about mapping the project impacts to ministerial priorities. So you can see why they're considered high influence and high interest, and why you need to get them on board, and why you need to show that your project is relevant to them, because they are the ones who are going to sign off on the project, and they are going to give you the go-ahead. And you can start by talking about constructing and operating your desalination plant will create opportunities that both align with, but also can really help the government to better deliver those priorities. So here we've looked across for this particular department, this minister, here are their portfolio areas: water, First Nations people, young people, economic development. These are a couple of hypothetical, slightly loosely based on strategies that actually exist examples. So within those strategies, you start seeing what are the priority areas and what are the outcomes they're trying to achieve through the actions and the programs that they're funding and delivering. Where are the things that you could value add to? So if we look at, say, for First Nations people and for young people that want for more jobs and more training locally, and to establish themselves economically and to have some financial independence, those are big things that the government is interested in doing. You're delivering a project that is going to provide jobs, create business opportunities. There are opportunities then within your project to build in enhancements that will enable First Nations people and young people to benefit more greatly. So you might have to treat them differently to ensure that they can enjoy those benefits. And we'll get to that a bit later. The next slide, please.
The key impact for me from that particular approach there is that it resonates with those who advise the decision makers in a way that I just did not anticipate. I still remember the day I plonked a similar looking table in front of people who were sort of circling the decision maker, and they understood kind of immediately how they could use it, because it covers each minister that has an influence, gives an indication of their degree of influence. On one page, it sets out the authorising environment and gives a whole heap of talking points. So it's really powerful and something you just don't get in the social impact assessment usually, and marries together the strategic policy alignment part of the business case to what is usually just a technical assessment. So it is really powerful and can be used in multiple ways.
Thanks, Joel. And I'd forgotten that little bit at the end, the compelling narrative and the key messages, or the announceables, if you will. So those are just talking back to government on what it's trying to achieve, but it's being able to say, I've understood what you want to do, and I can see that we can value add to that. So it's building that compelling narrative within your case study. That is, we've heard you and we're in line with you. I have the next slide, please. So this again, it's the same. I won't talk through it to the same degree, but this maps it then to at the agency level. What is the agency funded to deliver, and what are their KPIs in terms of government goals, and what are they expected to deliver over the course of a year? And again, it quite often comes down to they've got strategic plans, they'll have informing plans, and those, where are the key objectives, responsibilities that they need to deliver? How is your project aligned with those, and how can your project help them deliver and achieve those? Can I have the next slide, please, Amanda? Now, this is a nice, neat way of putting together that whole framework of goals, outcomes, objectives, and priorities, and putting your project at the middle of it. The way I structure this, there's the project in the middle in dark. The darker shapes around it, or the darker hexagons in this honeycomb, they are those high-level government goals of what they're trying to achieve, and which every agency is brought in to help achieve. It then filters down next to that next level of the agency and ministerial priorities in terms of their strategic plans and their informing plans. So I think we talked previously about the First Nations plan and the youth plan. I've got the women's plan there. Now, if we talk about this women's plan is about female economic independence and empowerment. One of the areas being something along the lines of getting more women into STEM careers in non-traditional areas. If you're building an infrastructure and water plant, chances are there are fewer women who are in that industry. Could you build into your recruitment strategy a place that has pathways for women, whether that be through training into jobs? And when I talk jobs, not just the standard office jobs that might be associated with women, but the pathways into the engineering, the construction, the water management, and therefore building into that. So you might not think of a pipeline or a desal plant or those sorts of things as necessarily being something about female empowerment, but there are opportunities in there that as you go through and build and operate the desal plant, that it connects back to doing that. So can I have the next slide, please? This is where you start mapping your enhancements and aligning them with stakeholder priorities. So we've identified that an impact with the project will be the 700 construction jobs, ongoing 900 jobs for operation, and that you'll need to source 85% of your workers and goods locally. Now, when we think back to some of those marginalised groups we talked about, they're often on the back foot when it comes to employment, when it comes to having the right skills, or being part of, or being able to benefit from what economic development and opportunities happen as a result of the project. So it might require some very specific enhancements and deliberate enhancements in order to deliver some sort of equity to them. There are policies and frameworks that guide you through this in most state governments. Here, with my fictitious hypothetical situation, I've put some of the frameworks down the side. So if we look at for First Nations people, there's a desire for more jobs because that brings about some economic stability, creation of intergenerational wealth. So you could put a target in there that says 15% of jobs across all areas of operation and construction are earmarked for First Nations people. That 20% of your procurement is earmarked for Aboriginal or First Nations owned businesses, or businesses that employ predominantly First Nations people. You will have, you're likely to have environment and heritage working groups. You'll allocate a place that First Nations people or a First Nations representative would be a co-chair. You'll benefit from the combined knowledge and different knowledges and perspectives. It also gives First Nations people some ownership over the project and some buy-in and a greater opportunity to have that say on how things happen and to ensure that their interests are also recognised, heard and addressed. The other being some development and leadership pathways as well. So again, it's people maybe getting jobs but not progressing through. Let's establish some pathways to do that. So I kind of like to think of it in the same sense of the give a man a fish, he'll feed himself for a day, give someone fishing lessons and they'll feed themselves, or a fishing pole, they'll feed themselves for a lifetime. It's a similar sort of principle. Don't just dump some money in on a one-term project, build in those things that are going to have lasting impact, and not just for the specific person, but for their community and for the generations that follow.
And
So the next slide.
that table there,
sorry, Joel.
I will do my very best whenever I get that table to find a place for it in the executive summary of a business case, because it is a tapestry that brings together numerous threads of different aspects of the business case. And as somebody who's an economist and is all about pluses and minuses, and likes to have mutually exclusive options to the nth degree, this kind of table just really gives me permission to get away from doing that and from exposing the argument in the business case or the arguments in the business case to one fatal flaw. What this mapping does is give the case numerous legs to stand on, and you can appeal to each of those stakeholders and they can be brought on board to support it, but it also gives the case robustness to criticisms that somebody like me may not have seen coming. And a table like that is really very handy for providing resilience to that type of attack on the argument.
Thanks, Joel. I think we can probably move to what I think is the last slide in the presentation. Here we go. These are some of the key takeaways that I hope you've got from the presentation, and where I think, or where we think, there might be some value in this approach, in these tools and tips for you that you could apply in the work that you do. So I want the equity focus. So social impact is about equity. And so hopefully with this approach, you can actively design enhancements into your project that will distribute benefits equitably and that have that lasting positive impact on the individual, on the whole community, and for generations to come. It's about the relevance. So it's maximising the relevance of your project to those key proponents and decision makers that might increase your likelihood of securing their backing or their funding. And while this may sound cynical, it's if you don't get the backing or you don't get the funding and the project doesn't go ahead, you don't have those you don't have the chance to deliver those benefits and opportunities and to make that difference. It is customizable. I think anyone can pick it up and use it for different projects. The tools and tips can be applied to a range of different projects, and I think across most sectors and industries. And I think for people with different skills backgrounds who are in different positions within an organisation as well, I think they're fairly simple that they can be picked up and used, definitely. And I like to think that they're enduring. So it's possible that the projects that you do have overlaps with others, and if you're operating within the same state in particular, you're building a bit of a database of who your key stakeholders are, what their priorities are, and what enhancement opportunities there are that align with those priorities. And you could use those as you start planning a new project, so you're already informing what you can deliver with that. So that is the end of my talk. I'm really grateful for people for joining and for sticking it out and listening with it. I hope it was of some value, and I'm more than happy to talk to people about it in the future. Here we have a team of people who work in this space. Either we work together doing business cases and social impact, and even for people who are not necessarily doing specific social impact, we're looking at projects to make sure that they deliver good outcomes, good value, and have a positive impact on people. So thank you. Thank you everyone for joining and for taking the time to listen to the presentation. And again, I hope it was useful. We will be sending out a copy of the slides for your reference. And if you do have any questions that you would like to follow up on, please, my contact details are available, and get in contact with me or any of the other members of the MJA team. All of our talks lives are recorded and available on our website if you'd like to go back and and have a look at any of those. And our forthcoming one is in December 2023. So, yeah, I think I'm done. I'm grateful for people coming in and listening, and I hope it was of some value. Anything else from you, Joel?
No, thank you. And I'll just encourage people to embrace the SIA and make the most of it. Ever since I've been doing that, I know that it's really enlivened the narrative of what can usually be quite dry discussions of concrete, steel, dollars and cents, and really brings it back to the community and allows you to broaden the base of stakeholders who might be supportive of the investment that you're putting up.
Yeah, and just a reminder that this presentation should be available on our website by the end of the week. So the slides will be made available, but also the presentation recording will be available as well. So thank you and enjoy the rest of your afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.